In 2019, before the world changed, I moved away from New York City. What I didn't know then was that 2020 would bring a proper worldwide pandemic that would keep me away from the city for longer than I had been in my adult life. On one of my last days in New York, I marked the occasion by doing something I wanted to do for years. Walk the entire length of Manhattan, from the tippy top at Inwood all the way down to the Battery, 13 miles as the crow flies. It's now 2 pandemic years later, and I decided to do the walk again to see how the city had changed. Here's the story of 2 New York City walks with a pandemic in between.
My name is Christina Berge. I'm not a born and bred New Yorker, but I moved here when I was 18 years old, and then I left the city a couple years ago for work.
First New Jersey sunset. Wow.
With 2 weird years behind us, we decided to move back to New York a few weeks ago. I was stoked to be back in the city, ready to head out, walk around, see the sights, only to finally catch COVID.
God damn it.
So my triumphant return to the city started with days of being sick and stuck inside. I got the apartment set up, I alphabetized my spice rack, I drank a lot of tea, and I laid in bed a lot. Even though I was feeling better, I was still testing positive, so I didn't set foot outside this apartment for almost 2 weeks. But today, I'm healthy and testing negative, so I decided I'm going to retrace my steps and do that same walk down the full length of Manhattan again. It's 13 miles, or about 4.5 hours of walking if you don't meander. Google says I took 8 hours to go 28 miles last time, so I guess I meandered a lot back in 2019. Anyway, I'm off. The adventure started as most New York City adventures do, with an egg sandwich.
Hey, how you doing? Can I get a sausage, egg, and cheese on an egg bagel, please? Yes, sir.
Since 2019, I've started trying to eat less meat. Heading into the subway, here's me looking like a tourist, trying to swipe my MetroCard with my left hand while filming and failing at it. Now I pay with my phone since it's the future. Back in 2019, I did this trip alone,
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
but now my husband came with me.
Where's my shot?
Like before, I took the subway up to 207th Street. It still costs only $2.75 for the ride, though I pine for the old days of the flat $2 fare. This fitting bit of subway art was still here, but they had put up a big gate in front of it, which felt weirdly foreboding. And then this tree at the corner of Inwood Hill Park had lost a limb, but whoever decorates it is still doing a great job. There are very few places that feel old in Manhattan, but parts of Inwood Hill Park feel untouched by time. It's the largest remaining old-growth forest on Manhattan, and it's not landscaped or manicured like other city parks. One of the coolest places in Manhattan is these caves in Inwood, known to the Lenape Indians as Shurakopkok. This bunch of boulders was dumped here by some glacier and used by the Lenape as a seasonal hunting camp. The beer can from 2019 was gone, but they're otherwise unchanged.
So starting in the 1890s, this engineer dude, the fellow who actually designed the base of the Statue of Liberty, he's also an amateur archaeologist, and he excavated here and found a bunch of like tools and fire pits and pottery sherds, all that good stuff. And elsewhere in Inwood, he desecrated a couple Indian graves, so I think people were kind of not too keen on the guy. True history lesson.
Despite the pressure of colonialism, Indians remained in Inwood until the 1920s and 1930s, occupying some tourist attractions nearby. The Wewasquek who lived in this area of northern Manhattan, all the way from Poughkeepsie down to here actually, famously had a trade route south which would evolve into Broadway. Here is the tippy top of Manhattan on the Henry Hudson Bridge. The bridge is named in honor of Henry Hudson, whose crew were the first Europeans to sail up the Hudson River in 1609. It's so strange to me that this path is in Manhattan, the most built-up place in the United States. This is probably pretty similar to what it looked like in 1609. Inwood has a lot of cool old geology, including these weird carved glacial potholes that look deceptively man-made. If you go a bit further south, you'll hit Fort Tryon Park. 2019 me was fine taking the 100+ stairs of the Grand Staircase.
I feel pretty strong.
So up I went in 2022.
Maybe not.
Since I have a video recording of it, I can actually race against past me. It's a pretty rough transition from sitting in isolation for 2 weeks to this, so I don't feel too bad about being that much slower.
Oh, Christ.
The Cloisters, a medieval art museum, sits at the top of this hill, but I did this walk on damn near the shortest day of the year, so I had no time for masterpieces. Down I went out the south end of the park. Back in 2019, I had thought that the original native etymology of Manhattan was Island of Many Hills, and this area really fits that description. But it turns out that 2019 me was misinformed. The name Manhattan actually derives from the Lenape phrase translated as the place where we get bows, like archery bows. Speaking of hills, I next hit Bennett Park, which is the highest natural point in Manhattan. I completely missed that fact in 2019. And I was disappointed to see that finding public bathrooms in New York remains a challenge in 2022. Like, these bathrooms were closed and some nerdy kid had drawn some temporary graffiti on the wall.
It's a bash prompt.
What?
Someone drew in chalk a bash prompt.
You're still not allowed to feed the pigeons, but there seem to be a lot nearby regardless. At this point, I headed west to walk onto the George Washington Bridge, which has not changed much between 2019 and 2022.
What are you doing down there?
Nothing.
We did catch there our first glimpse of southern Manhattan.
It's crazy to look down at Manhattan.
I know, isn't it?
Doesn't look like it's like a separate island.
Yeah.
There were these stacked rocks along the shore in 2019, and they had largely fallen over as far as I could tell in the last 2 years. Again, that feels like some kind of portentous metaphor.
So there used to be a traffic cone up there back in 2019. I spent like a half an hour on Google Street View to try and find out exactly where it is. It's been replaced by a American flag. It's definitely the same tree. It's definitely those buildings. That's definitely the softball thingy. Bizarre.
In 2019, I almost got hit by a car for this shot. In 2022, I almost got hit by a car for this shot. A bit farther south, Dinosaur Barbecue is still there with some modifications for the COVID era.
Too cold for the GoPro to work happily.
Everyone knows who is buried in Grant's tomb, but fewer know about the other older grave on the same hill. In 1797, a well-loved 5-year-old died, probably by falling off the cliff here, and his gravesite is right next to the more august one nearby.
It's a little bit fancier than it was back in 2019. Bugs the shit out of me that this fourth flag is not hanging down.
We actually went inside Grant's tomb in 2022 because it was so cold. The low was 10 degrees Fahrenheit and it felt it with the wind.
Parks Department guy was super nice though. Never met a National Park Service person who wasn't super nice. So this is Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine. It's still under construction, which is not that surprising actually, because it's actually technically been under construction since construction began in 1892. So, fitting.
The Cathedral of St. John the Divine is almost the halfway point of the walk, but it's still north of Central Park. At this point, I was rapidly losing daylight, and I only made it to the top corner of Central Park. Still, it was pretty and moody, and the reservoir was beautiful at sunset. At the American Museum of Natural History, the problematic equestrian statue of Teddy Roosevelt, flanked by a Native American and African on a lower tier, was covered up in 2022, and it actually ended up being removed a few days later. Also, these 2019 mice had lost their home.
It's not a good film cinematographer, you know?
Billionaires Row, the ultra-luxury residential skyscrapers just south of the park, existed in 2019, and I still hate it. In 2019, my husband joined me at the southeast corner of the park, and we grabbed some dinner. In 2022, it was becoming evident that a winter storm was on its way. So we ducked into what used to be the Time Warner Center, but is now the Deutsche Bank Center, and ordered some takeout.
You want cheese fries?
Yes, please.
Looks like there might be a little rain starting at 9, so we're going to want to do this quick.
In 2022, Hudson Yards, the biggest recent development in Manhattan, was properly open, and they have this Instagram-friendly, lemon-based public art installation. At this point in 2019, we really started to book it. We went down past Union Square, past Washington Square, a block or so out of our way to see the place that I practically lived at for a decade.
It's been a lot of good days here.
And then zigzagging through the village until we hit the Hudson again, where I played with this tourist viewfinder thingy.
Oh, I had it.
You had it for a second.
In 2022, it was starting to get quite snowy.
A wintry mix.
We passed Little Island, which is a new 3-acre park on a pier which didn't exist in 2019. And at this point, we were starting to get proper weather. In 2019, we could see One World Trade Center, which I still call by the original colloquial name Freedom Tower.
Over this way. Oh, there it is. Somewhere up there is the Freedom Tower.
But in 2022, the storm was obscuring things.
At this point, I'm tired and cold. I want to go home.
So in 2019, after a dark walk down the Battery,
I think so.
my 28-mile walk was complete, and I was greeted with a triumphant view of the Staten Island Ferry departing in the direction of the Statue of Liberty. In 2022, somehow I timed it the same, but it was way harder to see anything in the storm.
And it's a Battery Park. It's a very treacherous, wintry walk. Look how shady the treads of my shoes are versus his. Good timing again. Oh God, everything's so cold.
You see the Statue of Liberty out there?
Barely, but yeah, it is there. Whoop. You just barely make it out. Right there. Bye, Staten Island Ferry. There's no one else in this park. Just us. Good walk. Can't really see me. Made it.
Just snow.
It's cold as f***. It's time to go home.
In both cases, we headed north and hopped in a taxi home.
Whew, made it. So not walking for 2 weeks to, oh God, walking like, what we say it was? 21 miles?
I've done 21 miles today.
Whew. I'm beat. So there you have it. It's too cold to be out here without a mask on. 2 long New York City walks. One before the pandemic hit, and the other, I guess unfortunately still in the midst of the pandemic 2 years later. Walking around New York City is one of my favorite parts about living here, even on awful days like this. If you enjoyed this video, check out the others. They're typically more science focused, but there is one about rats in New York City, so. Anyway, thanks guys for watching. The city of here's the story of 2 New York City walks with a pandemic in between.